So
It's
welcome everyone
3:02.
to the very first STEMPeers session for the summer cohort for Gurukool. I know that we have both Gurukool and STEMPeers participants today. For those of you who aren't part of the full Gurukool program, this gives you a little flavor of some of the stuff that we do in that platform. And if you are ready to be making your career transitions, the fall might be the right time to reach out and join that. I want to introduce Barbara Natalizio. She's an amazing colleague of mine. I'm going to hand it over to her immediately, though, so that we can get started. And I'm so thrilled that she's part of this program with us. And Barbara, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tracy. The admiration for collegiality is shared, certainly. Can everyone hear me okay? A thumbs up? Yes? Okay. So thank you all for coming today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. This is definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. I've been thinking about designing my life, my career steps, very intently for many years now. I developed, a way to share this with multiple people, over time. And what's interesting is that it's an evolving process. And I'm super excited to welcome you into my way of thinking about it, and to also extend the offer for you to all think about different ways of exploring your next career steps, whether you are a graduate student or postdoc, or even further along in your career, and thinking about making a change. So I'll start with that. What I thought would be helpful would be for me to give a brief overview of my journey, right? And I use that terminology because it's important to have that awareness that it is a journey. It is an evolving journey. We'll use the terminology Odyssey a little bit later, and we'll talk about that. My journey started with Duke University as a graduate student in molecular genetics and microbiology. During that time, I explored some other options beyond academia, not necessarily to the degree in which I explored them as a postdoc, but I did do some exploring. When I was a postdoc, I moved to Vanderbilt. I did my postdoc there, and during that time, that was about the same time that the NIH had a program called the Broadening Experiences in Scientific Training Program. Some of you may be familiar with it. And it was basically a program that really incentivized institutions to think about what it would look like if, non-academic careers and other career trajectories were considered in this broad space. And what would that look like if career and professional development offices within institutions supported that type of training? And so the program that they had at Vanderbilt was called Aspire. One of the other things that I did while at Vanderbilt was called the Tech Venture Challenge, which was basically a business competition that was run out of the Tech Transfer Office. It took upcoming, technologies from within Vanderbilt and actually put it in the hands of teams of graduate students and postdocs that were interdisciplinary teams from the university, and provided them with an opportunity to pitch this as a business. And then I also did a certificate in college teaching. So that's kind of those batch of experiences. My other group of experiences, speaking of, exploring options on a journey, I was fortunate to attend science communication training in the early days at the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science, which just actually celebrated its 10th anniversary. And so I came back to Vanderbilt, was able to do some work in science communication that was you know, in a very pioneering stage at Vanderbilt, you know, and then that led me to another group called the Cultivating Ensembles in STEM Education and Research group, which I became actively involved in, and I'm still actively involved in. As a matter of fact, I was just on the phone with them immediately before this call. And so I had these really interesting experiences, and then I transitioned to, you know, my time with the NPA, which I'm still actively involved with the NPA at this point. You know, served as a volunteer, transitioned to the board. I have been on the board for about 6 years. You know, I've done, you know, have had a tremendous growth and diversity of experiences with that organization. That also led me to the opportunity to be a science policy fellow at AAAS, which was an excellent opportunity to really learn about government and policy making, and really a diverse group of experiences and a wonderful group of colleagues, which was actually one of the best things about that experience, is really, you know, developing a network, building relationships. That also led me to work at the National Academies. I worked for approximately a year. I worked on several different reports on graduate education and biomedical scholars, minority serving institutions. So that was a wonderful time. And during that time, I met my current employer and interacted with some of them while at the National Academies. And that led me to my work in private philanthropy right now at the Rita Allen Foundation. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Rita Allen Foundation is a small philanthropic foundation that supports early career biomedical scholars, amongst other things, including our current focus, which is on science and society, which in this moment in history is becoming extremely interesting space to be in right now. So suffice it to say that I've had a very diverse set of career experiences, and this comes back to this idea of curiosity that we'll also revisit later. I was curious to know what was beyond just work at the bench, and I pursued opportunities that allowed for me to look into those opportunities and to have experiences. And all of those experiences led me to other things. And so right now, okay, so the session objectives today, right? What I'm going to talk about in this context is design thinking in the context of designing a career for you and designing a life. And it's really about building a joyful, meaningful life for you, which, you know, in its totality is both your personal experiences and your professional experiences, right? So it's both of those things. And a lot of this work and a lot of what I'll present today is really based on two books. One of the first book is Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. That was my first introduction really to design thinking, and really this idea that you could design your life around these principles and around this approach. And so what I will say is that they came out with a new version, Designing Your Work Life, which I have yet to actually read. That came out earlier this year, and I'm really excited to read through that as well, and to understand what they have to say. What I will say is that Bill Burnett and Dave Evans have been teaching this course at Stanford University for many years now. You know, and this book was their offer to the broader community to say, this is all that we've learned over years of teaching this course and how it can be applied more broadly, not just to undergraduates, but to beyond.
Okay, in that case, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So session objectives, right? So I just want to increase your awareness of what the design thinking approach is and what your mindset could be when you're thinking about this. I want to be able to kind of walk you through applying the principles and methodologies to intentionally designing a fulfilling career for you going down the road, with the intention that, you know, this is an ongoing process, right? Like, this is an evolving process. It's not going to be like, oh, I finally decided on what I'm going to do and I don't have to worry about it anymore, right? So this is an ongoing process, and I want to, you know, invite you to, you know, be aware of that and kind of lean into that as much as you can. Also, this is about, you know, empowering you to build your relationships, build a community of practice around, you know, what this looks like for you, and discover, you know, there's so much more to be explored, you know, after you leave graduate school, after you leave your postdoc. You know, I mean, my first slide, I think, gave an indication of what that looked like, at least for me, and I'm not done. And so I have a lot more exploring to do and a lot more adventures to have, and, you know, just trying to embrace that and thinking about how we move forward. So what I'll say is I'm going to start off with just saying, you know, give you some context about what we're kind of talking about and how you might launch this idea and how you might get started in your mind. Then I'll go through a design thinking introduction. We'll talk about dysfunctional beliefs and this idea of reframing problems. I would like for you to participate with me in a work view and life view exercise, and also the exercise of developing a quick Odyssey plan for you with the new concepts that I've introduced. And then also just kind of going into, where do we go next? What is next for you, and how do you go about doing this? And how do you invite people to help you stay accountable, think about this, because I want to acknowledge that these aren't easy questions, right? They're kind of mind-bending questions. There's lots of complexity here, and that's okay. And just know that, you know, you might not come up with the perfect answer, and that's okay, and that's part of the design process. Okay, so the difficult questions, you know, I mean, I think the difficult question was always, well, when are you getting done with graduate school? Or when are you getting done with your postdoc? And it's like, I don't know what that question means. And so, you know, an equivalent question is, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you graduate? What do you want to be when you finish your postdoc? What do you want to do? You know, and even at my older age, you know, I guess, what am I, 10 or more years out of graduate school, that, you know, it's still evolving. But how do I get there, right? And then also appreciating that there are many stages of your career, right? And there's many, you know, sub bullets, right, within these points, right? So yes, you have early career. Yes, you have a mid-career. You have a late career, and then you have, you know, what people call an encore career, right? So after you retire, what do you do, right? So there's so many possibilities, right? So many possibilities to consider here. So design thinking is a process of agency. And so when I think about design thinking, it really is, it provides you agency to really give context and a systematic basis and approach to approaching complex or wicked problems, as some people like to call them. You know, this is not an engineering problem. This is not a marketing or business problem, right? This doesn't have an obvious, I don't want to say an obvious answer necessarily, but like, we're not building a bridge here and there's a data set that we can go back to and calculate numbers and there's a right answer. And then you build the bridge to those specifications, right? So this is a much more complex, you know, situation. There's emotion, there's family, there's your professional life. There's multiple things that are, you know, kind of participating in this process. And so, you know, so design thinking, you know, but it is an approach, right? And it's an interesting approach. So here's the approach, you know, generally speaking. So the first step of design thinking is really empathize. So the idea is, if you had a problem in hand, like you need to conduct interviews, gather stories, seek to understand, be non-judgmental. I think this picture, I love this picture. It really does kind of get to the heart of what being empathetic is, right? So what is this person, right? What is this, what is this little girl trying to do, right? What is her perception of trying to get a book off of a shelf, right? And that's just one way of interpreting what this image is telling us. And so, right, being empathetic to what, to perspective, and gathering stories and being in a situation where you're trying to listen and learn and understand perspectives. Defining the statement, defining the question. Right? This is about understanding the user. So take what you've learned from empathizing and your interviews and your collecting of stories, understanding your user, defining their need, and also bringing the insight that you've gotten from these interviews and these stories, right, and all of this to create what's called a point of view statement, and just really to define the problem. And then you have the ideation stage, right, which is basically brainstorming, right? No idea is wrong. No idea is too outrageous. You want to go radical here. You want to throw all the ideas on the table. It can be completely absurd. It doesn't matter. You just want to brainstorm. This is also, yes and thinking, which some of you might be, familiar with, is really like, this is not, coming to the table and be like, or no, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Just everything goes into the bucket. And then you do have to prioritize, right? And then ultimately, right, you're taking these ideas and you need to, now you've brainstormed them, and now you need to start thinking about, well, I can't do all of these things. So we do need to prioritize some, and also be okay and be satisfied with the idea that you are prioritizing them, and that's okay. All right. So everybody knows what a prototype is, right? So simple. Try it. Does it fail? You learn from there, right? Repeat. Right, and then test. So what I'm going to say is, let me move this. Yes. Okay, Tracy's giving me the thumbs up. Is it? Maybe I can.
It was a little garbled there. So let's, if you would just, talk about the repeat and the iterate, that one last bullet. And I think everyone, we got a little garbled there for just the last bullet, I think.
Okay. So yes, thank you, Tracy. So this is really about, iterating quickly, like failing fast and iterating quickly. So you just need to kind of repeat, and then testing, right? Like, what did you learn from the prototypes that you made and you tried and you tested, and then, right, and repeat. So, I'm going to move on and say, this is another way of thinking about it, right? And what I love about, this particular image is that, they're circles that actually are interlocking, and that are, okay, we're good. So anyway, that are interlocking, and that, that the arrows keep on going back to repeating that cycle again and again and again, right? So part of this is about gaining an understanding, right? That's what the early phase is about. Then exploring all sorts of different options, like, let's try out these different things and experiments. And then the testing and implementation is more about, materializing that into something that you can sink your teeth into and really go down the road with. All right, so dysfunctional belief and reframing. So dysfunctional belief is an interesting piece of this puzzle. Dysfunctional belief happens when you hit a snag, right? You hit a roadblock and it becomes something that, you know, just puts everything on hold. You say, oh my gosh, like I can't get beyond this question. And because I can't get beyond this question, I just can't continue on. And so really this is about, you know, taking those beliefs and then reframing them into something different. And in terms of designing your life, one of the things is to say, I need to figure out the best possible way moving forward, right? And it's really not about the best, because there could be many bests given all of the influences on your personal and professional life, right? And again, a journey that has its ups and downs, and a journey that, you know, exposes you to all of these different things. You know, for example, right, if I had decided in graduate school or in early days of my postdoc, you know, my best possible life is this, and I'm only going to pursue these things, and then that would have hit a snag, right? Like instead, I did a lot of different things. I did interdisciplinary teams. I did, you know, business. I did National Postdoc Association. I did policy. I did, you know, was the chair of our postdoc committee. I worked with all manner of people. So it gave me a diversity of experiences. Right. So, and also another one is, oh, it's too late, right? I've already committed to saying I'm going to be a PhD in molecular genetics and microbiology, and that's my career path, and it has to be science, and it has to be genetics, and this is my path, and it's my chosen path. And what I want to reiterate here and really stress is that it's never too late to design something that you love better. And really to be creative in that space. You know, what I'll also say as part of this is that, you know, thinking about the diversity of experiences that you could think about taking on. One of the things that, I was listening to earlier today was this idea of, like, in most universities, there's only something like, you know, 55 to 75, let's say, different majors, right? But, you know, and that holds true for graduate school as well, right? But there's obviously not 55 to 75 jobs, right, that are out there. Oh my gosh, there's hundreds of thousands of different jobs and combinations thereof, and volunteer experiences, right, that could all be a part of what goes on here. So I just want to kind of put that out there for consideration. So work view and life view. So one of the ways to approach this is to think about work view. This is something that I certainly hadn't thought about before I started reading the Designing Your Life books and the approach of design thinking. But this is, you know, a question, you know, what does work mean to me? Why am I working? You know, what defines good and worthwhile work to me? And how does money, my personal and professional growth, my personal fulfillment, and my skills and experiences, right, have to do with all of this? So that's one thing to really, you know, kind of start thinking about. The other part of this is what's my life view? Right. So what are other, you know, defining values and perspectives that provide the basis for your understanding of life? Like, I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole with life view, of course, but why are we here? What's the meaning and purpose of life? You know, where do family, personal, country, you know, my own value set, like where do these all play in here? And the idea here is that, you know, what you want to strive towards, and it's not, you know, imperative, but you want to strive towards is to articulate, you know, what does work view mean and what does life view mean to you? And I'm not here to say that you're going to figure these out in the next, you know, 3 minutes. But it's important to think about it. And to realize that the research shows that when your work view and your life view are aligned with your career choices, that those people tend to have a little bit more satisfaction with their career choices. So just something to keep in mind. So what I'd like to do is I'd like for you to take 3 minutes to just kind of think about that. You know, why do I go to work? You know, what makes, you know, what is worthwhile about work for me? You know, and I would love to take, you know, just 3 minutes, just for you to write something down quickly. What I will say is, like, for example, you know, I've been, you know, I think about this often. And, you know, one of my more recent revelations, or one that I've been focusing on recently, is really this idea of what makes work worth coming to and doing is, you know, this idea of me being challenged. I love the idea of a challenge. I love the idea of solving problems. I love the idea of, like, getting into the nitty gritty of that. And that's what I find fulfilling. So I'm just going to leave you with that example, but I'll give you 3 minutes. I will set up a timer, and I can put myself on mute, and I'll let you go ahead. And then I will ask if some of you could report out, you know, very briefly about what you came up with, and then we'll get back into it. All right, everybody. All right, I'll bring us back. Does anyone want to report out on what they were able to think about their work view?
Yeah, I think somebody messaged from Nandakushore Mule. Can I read it?
Sure.
Yeah, so he says, intellectual stimulation is driving force for me to go to work. Then number 2, in a broader sense, the sense of giving back to the community by making lives better through research is very satisfying. And last but not least, remuneration is important for sustenance. I mean, monetary as well as recognition, which makes it worth to go an extra mile to make things work.
Well, that's great. Wow, I wish I could have come up with that in 3 minutes. That's fantastic. Yeah, no, that's great. I'm very, you know, this is completely in line with, you know, what's great about exploring your work view, and then thinking about future career trajectories, you know, with that in the back of your mind, right? Because it's a little, it becomes very disjointed for you as an individual when, you know, you realize that your work isn't necessarily fulfilling that, but then it becomes a puzzle, right? It's a puzzle to solve. Like, what is it about my work that's not fulfilling for me right now? And then it's also a puzzle if you are saying, you know, my work is fulfilling for me right now as a graduate student and postdoc, and defining why it's fulfilling for you, and then applying those things and saying, okay, how do I match, you know, that fulfillment in a future career, or in my next step in my job trajectory? I will also, we can also share this other one that's in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, there's 2 others. There's two others.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you see them?
I do. Work means an opportunity to learn something new every day. Oh, I love that part of work. Being part of the solution to a bigger problem, either a scientific question or an unmet medical need. Being able to interact with colleagues from different backgrounds. Absolutely. I love that diversity piece too. Problem solving, something concrete that I achieved at the end of the day. Love that idea of deliverable, and what am I gaining from working, and having that be meaningful to you. working in an environment that encourages problem solving, innovation, promoting STEM literacy, inclusive intelligence, ability to communicate with a broader audience. Wow, that is really resonates with me too. I absolutely agree. I love working in innovative spaces. That was one of my favorite things about working working at the National Science Foundation, because, as fellows, we were able to really interact with the program officers and really lend our expertise and lend our thoughts to what was being developed in terms of different programming, different solicitations, how those solicitations might be altered or changed, and like kind of how they were being altered in order to get to an end point where we would encourage more innovation, right, from the community. And I'll close with this one. Being able to make an immediate impact on people's lives is one of the major driving forces. Paid well is a very important issue so that you can live a comfortable life, right? And I think that is very much a part of what we all desire, right? Because if we're comfortable financially, then we can usually give more of ourselves emotionally or through a volunteer capacity, or other things that we have a passion for, right? Because many of us have multiple passions. Okay, whoops, oh my goodness. Okay, all right. So now I would like to take you through another exercise. And so this exercise is really building on, kind of building on that work view. So now you've thought about what your work view would entail. What is important to you about the work that you do? And I'm going to encourage you with the Odyssey Plan to really think outside the box. And so, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do? So, if I was, living on a yacht in, the South Pacific, and I could do anything that I want because I didn't have to work, then what would that look like for me? And so, and I'm going to, in my next slide, I'm going to show you an example of an Odyssey plan, an example Odyssey plan that we can kind of walk through in addition to that. And so basically you have to draw the timeline, right? So I believe that the timeline, in the worksheet that's available through Designing Your Life is like a 1 to 5 year time frame, but it can be any time frame. But you want to include personal and professional events, right? Like, what is their family? Is there childcare? Is there elder care? Is there something else? Is there travel? Is there education? So all of these things. So, and a creative title should naturally emerge, but it's not a requirement. And so this is just like a version of your life. Like, okay, this is one version of your life. And typically I would encourage you to develop multiple Odyssey plans. Usually the happy number is 3. And so, you need to ask questions. So what other new and different things might I need to learn in this version of my life? And we'll talk about it a little bit later. But for example, if you wanted to run a nonprofit organization, what would that mean for you? All of the things that you need to learn in order to be successful in that situation, right? And so that's gauging, right? So what resources might I need in order to do, right, this plan? How do you feel about this plan? Like, once you actually have it down on paper, are you feeling excited about this plan? Are you being energized by this plan? Like, are you just like, oh yeah, if I was able to make this happen, that would be awesome. And so is that how you're feeling about it? Or like, once you write it down on paper, you're like, maybe I thought that this was a good idea, but maybe not. Confidence. So do you have the confidence to pull it off? What would you need in order to have the confidence to pull it off? And does the plan make sense, right? So, you know, I mean, again, right, this is a version of ideation. So all, you know, ideas are welcome. However, you know, if this, you know, has you in Antarctica and, you know, Denmark at the same, you know, year period of your life, I don't know whether that's a possibility and whether that makes sense. You know, things to consider: geography, where would you live? Right now it's pretty interesting because a lot of everything is online, so maybe that's less of a concern. What experience will you gain? What skill sets? What impacts? What are the impacts of choosing this path? So here is an example of one example of an Odyssey plan. So this person's Odyssey plan, you can kind of, it's a little, you know, it's supposed to be like this, right? Like it's supposed to be messy. But this person kind of has 3 parts to this, right? So this version says, you know, I want to start a nonprofit. I want to start a 501(c)(3). What do I need to do, right? Like I need to raise money. I need to recruit staff. I need to figure out what development is for, right? I need to think about where this nonprofit might be. Do I need staff? Do I need a board? Do I need a location? What does that mean, right? How do we bring it to scale, right? Over a course of, like, let's say 5 years. And then there's, you know, if you go, you know, a little bit, you know, further down, don't forget about family. Right? So elder care, child care, vacations, other things that are in the personal scope of things, and what might that look like? All right. And then, you know, if you are going to be doing a nonprofit, or you're an entrepreneur, or you're thinking about doing something along those lines, does that mean I have to go back to school? Maybe, maybe not. Does that mean I have to take, you know, specific coursework to fill in gaps? Maybe, maybe not. So, you know, so this is back to school, you know, this is 1 year, 2 years, right? Getting an MBA or whatever that means for you. And at the bottom of this plan, right, resources. Okay, do I have the resources? Like an obvious resource is a financial one, for example. Do I have the finances to go and pay for an MBA? I don't know, right? So that's one thing to consider. And then again, right, there's this likability scale. Like when you look at this, it's just like, this would be super fulfilling if I actually, you know, was able to pull this off. You know, confidence level. Can I pull this off? Or is this like so really a remote possibility, or there's just like too much going on in this that I don't feel confident as I can? Or do I need to develop context in order to make this happen? And then there's the coherence. Like, does this make sense? You know, like, okay, yeah, 501(c), going to school, there's family, there's a lot of pieces here, but it doesn't seem unachievable. Okay, so with this, I'm going to ask you to take about 5 minutes, because I know that we're kind of getting to the end here, but take about 5 minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and kind of really jot down some quick things about what an Odyssey plan might look like for you. And then I will again ask for anyone to offer some, you know, general ideas about what they were able to sketch out, you know, just as a starting point, for you. Okay, and I'll leave it at that, and I will mute myself, and we'll be back in about 3 to 5 minutes.
We're recording again. You can go.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. I see already in the chat that I won't necessarily read through this one, but thank you so much for sharing. I love this idea, and I love that you have a bunch of 10 out of 10 on the happiness scale. I think that's just really inspiring. And that's kind of where I'm going with this, right? And so I would encourage you to really think outside the box with some of these things, right? Like a good one for me, it's always on my docket somewhere. I want to live in the English countryside at some point in my life. I'm not exactly sure how I make that happen, but that often shows up in an Odyssey plan for me. And so, but then it becomes, or a Fulbright scholarship shows up in an Odyssey plan for me. And I'm like, well, how do I balance that with family and time and geography and all of those things? And so, and I don't, and I want to encourage you to really kind of think critically about, some of these things. So I'll put a pin in that. I'll set it for homework for you guys, and you can think about it. But I hope that kind of is setting you in the right direction to really think about, like, what if I were to do like an Odyssey plan or multiple Odyssey plans and really kind of put it down on paper instead of like these ideas that are kind of floating around in my head that I haven't really exactly put my finger down on, and like put it out on a timeline and see how that all aligns with, personal, professional, where you are, your career, all that stuff. All right, so I will move us along here. Okay, so now we've done work life, we've done Odyssey plans. We've done some ideation on some level, right? That's kind of what an Odyssey plan is, a form of ideation. And so what's next on the design thinking spectrum is prototyping. Okay, so you've now decided, perhaps you want to run a 501(c)(3). So what does that mean for you? Talking to people who run 501(c)(3)s, talking to people who run, nonprofit organizations that are maybe aligned with, what you're thinking about starting one for, thinking about, different alternatives to 501(c)(3)s. If that requires you to go back to school, it may or may not. You can talk to people who have started 501(c)(3)s who didn't get their MBA, or who took a different set of coursework that's maybe less that's equally as prestigious but perhaps less expensive than investing a substantial amount of money in an MBA. Or maybe that means going to a place where they might pay for your education in some way, shape, or form. So all of those things, right, to say is that go ahead and start planning what these conversations are. Start making connections, asking people, ask for help. Oh my gosh, just ask for help. People are there and they want to be supportive and they want to help you get to whatever that next step is. This could be job shadowing, it could be internships, it could be fellowships, it could be different types of experiences. Right now it's kind of an interesting, time. I think there are lots of virtual opportunities that you could take advantage of, in the evenings, right? Or at different times of the day where you might be available. There are so many webinars, there's so many podcasts, there are so many, other opportunities for virtual networking, and thinking about that in this space, right? So it used to be that we go for coffee, and I certainly hope that we'll be going for coffee soon. I hope, but maybe it's not an in-person meeting. Maybe it's a, hey, can I meet you on Zoom for a half an hour or 20 minutes, right? Which is so much of a lower bar for everyone, and just asking those questions, right? And so that's how we can kind of continue with this. So with this, I just kind of want to, put some closing thoughts together for you as you're really kind of thinking about using design thinking and applying it to career. Empathy, right? And applying empathy to yourself. Right. And so that's kind of the idea that I want to, we talked about conducting interviews and understanding the user and their need and really kind of being empathetic with what your user needs. And, in terms of your career, it's you, be empathetic towards yourself. When you think about your happiness factor, or you think about your confidence level and the likability and can I pull this off and does it resonate? you know, do that. Be honest and transparent with yourself. And I know that it's not easy. It's hard, right, to kind of bring all those thoughts together and make it coherent. You know, defining the problem, right? So you as the user have this need, right? And it's informed by these insights that you've gotten as a result of your kind of having these open, honest conversations with yourself. You know, and then you have the ideate stage, which we kind of just did a little bit of, you know, but okay, these are my needs. I'm the user. What can I do? What are options? You know, let's think about it. Can I get in touch with somebody? Can I contact somebody? Can I, you know, apply for a random job? Can I do a little bit more exploring about job titles, about job functions, about, you know, different careers that I may not have even thought of? I mean, what I will say is that, you know, it is beneficial to put your name in the hat for different things. You know, I only shared in my early slide the things that, you know, kind of resonated with me and took off with me, right? So, you know, I love doing the Tech Venture Challenge. I love doing science communication. I love doing the policy work, right? But there were so many things that were in there that I did that I was just like, oh man, this is not for me. So, and that brings us to prototyping, right? Like, so fail fast, right? Iterate, try, experiment, and know that, you know, and it's a gift when you realize I did this and, oh my gosh, this is not at all for me. Because it's something that you can be like, I did it and I tried it and it's not. And that's okay. And then the testing phase, right? And implementation. So what I would love for you to do, right, is, you know, a follow-up to here, you know, identify someone within this group, you know, who has a shared interest, you know, in developing these ideas with you. I will say when I first got started with this, it was because my friend Chi Chi came down, you know, to my cube one day while I was at NSF. And she was just like, I read this most amazing book and you have to do this with me. And this is really how this started. You know, and we developed a working group together. We held ourselves accountable to meeting and talking about these things and really asking each other the hard questions. And I really encourage you to do that. So ideate, brainstorm, be creative. You know, you don't have to do it in isolation again, right? Like this is about community building, relationship building, all of that, right? Build a life design team, right? Build people who will help you maybe answer the difficult questions. And also, you know, your team will, you know, and I don't want to say you want to build like a tremendously large team, but even if you had a team of 5 to 7 people, which is about, you know, the size, you know, that is recommended for small teams. You know, you could say, I really need to find somebody who's an entrepreneur. Does anybody know who I could talk to about that? And maybe within your team of 5 to 7, and there are broader network beyond that, would probably be able to help you find someone. So this is really about the collaboration, and it does take a village. So final thoughts, changing your mindset. Be curious. And I know that all of you are curious already. You're graduate students and postdocs, and you're very curious. So I don't even have to worry about that, right? So curiosity is not something that we as STEM individuals lack. But I encourage you to explore. Bias to action. Just do it, right? Like don't hold on to it. Just try and let it go, right? Try and do it, do the things, try things, you know, again, they may or may not work out, but at least you tried it and you have that experience under your belt. You know, reframing, don't get stuck at a point where it's just like, oh, like I just can't solve this problem, or it's just too much, or I need to find the exact perfect thing. Just no, it's okay. Like realize that there is no exact perfect thing. There are multiple avenues that you can explore. And awareness, right? Like be kind to yourself. This is a process. This is a journey. Like I just gave you a smattering of some of my journey that I've had. And in, another 10 years, I'm sure there'll be another, extended slide of many things that I'm sure I've tried. And some I will have succeeded in doing and some not. Radical collaboration, right? Like, this is building relationships, embracing your vulnerability, asking for help, finding supportive collaborations. So life design is a journey. And here's some additional resources. Again, I would encourage you to, maybe not redesigning your life, but there's plenty of information online about, what they talk about in that particular book. I'm really looking forward to looking into their new book and understanding. On Creative Live, there are some Designing Your Life courses that you can take, so that might potentially be an option for some of you. And I'll end that with a thank you, and I'll take any additional questions. Tracy, I don't know if you would want to moderate. But again, right, like, this is a dysfunctional belief, right? Like, if you're successful, you'll be happy. Well, let's reframe that, right? True happiness comes from designing a life that works for you, right? And at the end of the day, it's really about you and your career and your happiness and your own, personal and professional experiences that frame your life. So thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. That was absolutely amazing. There is a question a couple of questions that have come up, but the first one here that I'd like to sort of pitch to you is, there's a fear of failure when you're in that prototype phase, right? So the question is, do you think design thinking should allude to the fear, or do you think that it should facilitate it or lean into it, or how do we reframe that so that it doesn't feel scary or intimidating?
Scary. Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's, been my experience, is that, these are all life experiences. And I think the way that I reframe some of these things is like, if it's scary to you and you're afraid to fail, which we all are, I think, a good example is a job opportunity, or something is made available to you, or is offered to you, and you say, oh my gosh, this is so outside of my wheelhouse. I have no idea whether I would be successful. And with that, I would say, why not take a chance? And you know what, if you're not successful and it doesn't end up working out, I think that there's a way too that you can flesh out in your mind, okay, so what if I'm, kind of think in advance. What if I'm successful doing this? Oh my gosh, all these great things will happen as a result of my success in this position, right? And then you can also look on the other side and say, okay, well, what if I failed? Okay, well, list out to me what would happen if you failed. Like, worst case scenario, what would happen if you failed? Well, if I took on a job that I was just totally terrible at, and it was the wrong fit, and this, that, and the other thing, you know what would happen? I would say, oh, I'm going to put that in my back pocket. It's going to be my 6-month experience, my 1-year experience, my whatever, and I'm going to work my hardest to say, this is what I learned from that experience, and then use that as a launching pad to continue. And I think that you can look at it in that way, and that maybe make it a little bit less anxiety producing, a little less scary, and just being like, okay, well, let's list out, what happens if I was to totally bomb this, right? Now, I've certainly been in that experience, and then you say, right, like, that's the interview question. Give me an example of the time that you failed and what happened, right? And that would be the perfect opportunity to use that experience and say, okay, well, this is what happened. I made a not so great choice. And this is what I learned from that. And that's how I'm growing. And that's why I'm moving in this direction now.
I love that you tied that in, because that's often how I talk about having interview answers, right? You set up the situation, you give a little bit of the story, and then you talk about the result and talk about how it's a growing opportunity, experience, etc. And you can shift that negatively framed question into a positively framed question. So I'm just tagging that for all of you out there who might be thinking about that in that space. Okay, so lots of thank yous, lots of, this was a great new concept. This was, so you can see all of that in the chat. Any last big, hairy questions that I think we haven't responded to? So there is a question about visa question and situations. So maybe thinking about how to do this and with that in mind might be one last piece for you to think of, and maybe in the context of the webinar that we just did for MPA, where there's an example or two out of that could be done quick.
Yeah, I mean, so I will say that. So the NPA, the National Postdoctoral Association, and the American Physiological Association actually just held a webinar yesterday about navigating pandemic-related international issues. So the recording of that should be posted soon. I can certainly share it with Tracy, and then she can share it out with all of you. But yes, I completely understand that, this time is such a challenging time. I do want to acknowledge that. I do want to acknowledge the difficulty with that at this point. I think this is small bites, right? I think that, sometimes when you're thinking about these things, or even developing Odyssey plans, right, you're thinking like super big picture, but maybe this is a really, really small bite. Maybe this is, I want to take I want to be a better communicator, and I want to take this, short course that requires very little time, and I could just do a small checkbox. I mean, that I think would be interesting, right? Like if you have something in your mind that you're like, I think that this is the next step that I want to take. And if this is, and it doesn't require much investment of time and all of thinking about this, but it's like, okay, I would need X skill or Y skill in order to be successful in that position. What can I do that's a nibble, that's a small bite that shows that I have put something towards gaining a skill set that would make me a more attractive candidate? Like, can you just do something really small? That's not really a huge requirement of time, because I hear this from every conversation that I'm having right now, is like people are struggling, people are challenged, people are overwhelmed with what's going on in the world right now. So you're not alone. But I think, maybe it's just a really small bite, and maybe just taking advantage of the fact that there's so many things that are offered online, just to like add something small to your CV right now, just to be like, this is something I accomplished during that time. And it was small, but I accomplished it.
All right, so I hope that was very useful, and I'm going to go ahead. There was one other question that was asking if your communicating science was at Stony Brook, and it was just a course, right, that you took?
Yeah, it was just a course. And so what I will say is that Stony Brook does offer like a webinar series, as they have like a learning lab kind of webinar series that they do have up and running. I do think that you need to quote unquote apply for it. I don't know how many slots they have, and I haven't looked in a bit of time, but if you explore the Alda Center website, there are a bunch of excellent resources through there as well.
All right, and with that, we are slightly over time. I want to be respectful of Barbara's time and to say thank you very much for your time and your insight, for using this to help us, deal with some of the big, hairy questions that we have right now, and get through some of the challenges. And I think that this really gives some structure and some ownership and some real concrete tools to think about, how to take control where sometimes, especially right now, we feel like everything's spinning out of control. So, I encourage you guys to think about, how can you take this and do something with it. And with that, I'm going to give all of you lots of homework. Like Barbara, I'm seconding Barbara's homework. Do all your homework. And thank you so much, guys. And we will see you in about 10 days. The next session is going to be doing some transition planning. I'm going to be pulling in a little bit of this into that process, just so that we can, keep reiterating and building. And then we're going to be talking about a lot of different career paths and how to think about those and how to really deep dive into that self-assessment, think about what that means for you and your careers going forward. So enjoy your time over the rest of the weekend, and I will see you in a week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.